Well, welcome to Gever.com, where the wise get wiser. So in this lesson, we're going to be looking at the 13th letter of the Hebrew alphabet. And to get a sense of this letter, we're going to look at a few key words, really important words in the Old Testament, words like Messiah and the Angel of the Lord. And also to just practice and get more familiar with reading and understanding the Hebrew Bible, we're going to look at a few key verses with those important words in them as well, from Psalm 2 and even Exodus and Deuteronomy. So let's go ahead and dive right in. All right, well, we're going to go ahead and get started with our next letter in the Hebrew alphabet, the letter Mem, letter Mem. But before we talk about this letter more in detail, let's practice our Hebrew alphabet. So, of course, we're going to look at the whole alphabet quickly and then go through it just a little bit more slowly together. So let's do it. We have here Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, so that's the alphabet. Now let's do it just a little bit slower together here. All right, first letter is Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin, Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun, Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, and Tav. All right, well, that's our Hebrew alphabet. I do hope that it's starting to get a little bit more familiar, and perhaps that you can actually do it on your own. All right, well, let's go ahead and talk about this letter of the alphabet, the Mem, and this is another interesting one that's a little bit unique, similar to that letter Kaf that we saw before. And this letter has two variations, and so it's going to be important to be able to recognize both. Now, both are just the letter Mem, but as we saw before, the final form, the Mem Sophit, as it's often called, is going to occur only at the very end of a word. So when it's the last letter of a word, you'll have this final form of the Mem. But everywhere else, we're just going to have that regular form as we see over here on the right. Okay, well, how do we write it? So go ahead and take out a piece of paper and a pen and practice writing this so that you can get the sense of the letter as well. Okay, well, as is normal, we have our little space here where our letters are typically written. And for this Mem, it's kind of interesting. You start with this sort of diagonal, usually from the bottom to the top, and then you're going to come down to the bottom again, but diagonally. And then you're going to come across horizontally. And then there's this little piece that sticks up here off to the left side. And so you end up with, I think, it kind of looks like a mountain. And so maybe that'll help you to remember this letter. Mem or M is for mountain, right? Now, the word Mem doesn't mean mountain in Hebrew, but mountain starts with an M in English. So M or Mem is for mountain. All right, well, how about the final form? Well, for this one, it's going to be just a straight line down, vertical, filling that whole space, then a line horizontally, then a line up, vertically, and then a line horizontally, really just forming a box. And so in most fonts and styles, this is really just going to be a square. So even this little piece that hangs off the end here, as we'll see, is really not necessary, though most fonts do have something here. But in either case, it's really just simply a box, okay? And so that's our final form of the mem. So we have this little mountain version, if you will, of mem, and then the final form is a box. So let's look at a few different fonts, again, to help us distinguish, but also identify some of the key aspects that are really unique to that letter. So in this particular font, we see here that it's a little more rounded rather than sharp, but it still has the same basic form. Same over here, it's a little bit more rounded, and it doesn't have the little piece hanging off the end here. However, again, it's basically just a box, okay? Another one here, very similar, but as you can see, it's maybe just a little bit fancier looking. It's a little more rounded, but also square. Kind of feels a little bit more Hebrewish, I guess. And this one does try to keep that little extra edge here, that end sticking off. This one, again, is a very kind of simplistic form. So this one almost looks like the lowercase a, but backwards. But again, just if you are paying attention, you can kind of see it still has the same basic shape to it. All right, well, how about in ancient times? Well, in ancient times, Proto-Sinaitic, as you see here, we have this sort of squiggly, which kind of resembles the mem that we saw, the mountain form. And it looks like this because it was really meant to represent the word for water, ma'im, as we'll see here in a minute. And so ma'im was this picture, water. Well, this got simplified, I guess, a little bit, or maybe just refigured in the Paleo-Hebrew to look a little bit slightly different and to take on this shape here. But what's interesting is that in ancient Greek, they really kept that same sort of earlier Proto-Sinaitic form of the mem, which became the mu, or in English, of course, where we derive the M letter, literally. And so our M is very much related to that early form from Proto-Sinaitic for water, or ma'im. All right, well, how about just the sound of the mem? Well, as I said, the mem is unique because it has these two variations, the regular and final form. But thankfully, both of these forms, these variations, have the exact same sound. And that's the M sound, just like it is in English. So really no different. So again, for most beginners and students, this is a nice letter because it corresponds very nice with English. So let's start with some key words, Well, the first key word that we have here is our word for water, as I mentioned, ma'im. And in this word, you actually have both forms. You have the regular form and the final form, as we see here, right? So this mountain version of the mem and our final form, which is more of a box, okay? They sound the same, just this one is at the end. And only at the end. So the word is ma'im. And of course, again, ma'im just means water. All right. Well, how about another one here? This is the word malak. Now, malak is a verb meaning he ruled or he was king, maybe. All right. So malak. And this is related to that word for just king, melech, right? So melech comes from malak, he ruled. All right, well, two more really interesting and important words, and these occur a lot, but are sometimes a little bit more challenging for us as we learn a new language. And these are these kind of abstract filler kinds of words. So these are question words or interrogative pronouns, as they're called. And the first one here is me. And me is the word for who. So when I say me who, Me who? Who is me, right? And then ma, which is what? What? I like to say, what, ma? Right? As though some kid is talking back to his mother. What, ma? And me who? All right, so me who, ma, what? What, ma? All right, and two more words which are a little bit more dark and sad here. But these are the words to die or death, and then the verb meaning he died. And that is the words mut, or met. And because of this special form here, the word has a vowel in between the two consonants. And because of this, it makes it a little bit complicated, unfortunately. And you'll see a lot of different variations of the word to die or death or he died in verb and noun forms, and they overlap a lot, and they sometimes are hard to determine. And so we're going to see some different forms in one of the verses that we look at, but just know this is kind of a challenging word, and so don't get frustrated or dismayed at this word. All right, well, another word that has a similar sound to one we just talked about, malak, and this is the word malak, but it's not to be a king or to rule. It's actually the word for a messenger, or sometimes in the sense of an angel. Now, angel is kind of a specific word that we use in English to mean like a divine entity of some sort, right? An angelic, otherworldly creature or being. But malak didn't have to mean that. Sometimes it does, and sometimes it doesn't. Okay? So whenever you see the word angel, you don't necessarily have to translate it angel. It could be just messenger, or vice versa. But also, I want you to pay attention to the spelling of this word. So as you notice here, this is malak, and you have this type of vowel here on the front, but also you have this aleph stuck in the middle. All right? So if you remember from our word to be king, or he ruled, there's no aleph. So let me go back to that word, malak. So this one, malak, is very similar, but there's no aleph. Okay? So no aleph for the king. Okay? No aleph for the king. All right, so malak. And finally here we have, again, a very interesting and important word, Mashiach. Now, Mashiach is oftentimes translated as Messiah, but it really is just a word that means to be anointed. So this was a very common sense for kings. So kings were typically anointed. Also, priests were typically anointed. And this was kind of in the sense of like to commission, to make it official that they are this role, this kind of important leadership, mediator even between the Lord and the people. But of course, this word Mashiach eventually does, as the Bible progresses and it gets closer to the New Testament time, if you will, does develop much more into a savior figure who's going to come, who is either simply from the Lord, or perhaps from a few verses seems to be the Lord himself will come and be that savior. In any case, it certainly was to signify priests and kings, typically, who were chosen by the Lord, usually for a specific purpose and role. Let's go ahead and look at our first key verse. And this one is actually going to bring up a couple words that we're familiar with so far. So let's read it together here. All right, we have Yit Yatsevu Malkei Eretz. Yit Yatsevu Malkei Eretz. All right, so what is this? Well, first of all, here we have this word Yatsev, which is really from Natsav, meaning to stand or to take your station or to guard even. So here, this is kind of the plural, meaning they. So they have stationed or taken their stand. And then we have this word malke. So hopefully that looks familiar. It's related to that word malak, to rule, but in this case it's from melech, king, and in particular, plural. So the kings of Edit, or Edits, the land, or the earth even. So the kings of the earth have taken their stand. Ve roznim no sedu yachad. Ve roznim no sedu yachad. So what's going on here? Well, we have this word razon, rezin, meaning to be like a ruler, a prince of some sort, perhaps. And of course, that very common word, and attached to the beginning, the. So, and the rulers, right? So this im makes it plural. The rulers. So again, paralleling the kings of the earth. And then nosdu. So this is also plural. This u on the end lets us know it's they have done something. And this word is a little bit tricky. It comes from yasad, and it means to basically be established or to found something. And so here it's, they have established or founded yachad, together. Okay? So again, kind of really trying to parallel and say the same thing. This is very typical in biblical poetry, that you have the first line and then the second line, and they kind of parallel each other and sometimes say the exact same thing. Other times they kind of expand upon or even contrast the first line. But in this one, it seems like it's really meant to be the exact same, right? So the kings of the earth take their stand. The rulers form or establish themselves together, right? So in other words, all the rulers and the kings and the elites of the world have banded together. And what is this for? Al Adonai, the Al Meshicho, So all against Adonai, so they have banded together against the Lord, Va'al Meshicho, and against his anointed, his Messiah. So again, to take on the Lord is to take on the Messiah. To take on the Messiah is to take on the Lord. And so, although here they are distinct, there is a sense that they are kind of united in purpose and in will and in a lot of different ways. And so, there's this kind of similar to Jesus' saying, if you recall, that you're either with me or you're against me, right? And so, in this same kind of way, you're either with the Lord, you're either with his Messiah, or you're against him. There's really only two camps. There's not three camps. There's not 10 camps. There's not multiple options. You're either with the Lord, you're either with his Messiah, or you're against them. And so, in a kind of a crazy verse here, a poetic verse, it describes the whole world and all of the elites and the powerful binding themselves together to battle against the Lord. Of course, we see elements of this come up in the book of Revelation, in this kind of end times apocalyptic vision of the world coming against the Lord. But of course, we know that in the end, the Lord wins. In perhaps unique and unexpected ways, Jesus, even the Messiah, conquered death and the enemy, Satan, by his death and his humility on the cross. So, really interesting and powerful verse. All right, well, let's go ahead and take a look at Exodus 3. And this, of course, also has a couple interesting keywords for us. So let's read this together. We have Vayara, Malak, Adonai, elav. Vayara malak Adonai elav. So what do we have here? Well, this word here, ra'ah, is the word meaning to like see, or to, in this case, meaning to like become seen, to make yourself seen, essentially. In other words, and he became seen or appeared, as we would say in English, malak. So we just saw that word, malak, meaning an angel or a messenger. And then, of course, Adonai, of the Lord. So the messenger of the Lord, the angel of the Lord, appeared, elav, el, meaning to, and then av, meaning him. Of course, this is talking about Moses. So, and the angel of the Lord appeared to him. Now, we haven't talked too much about some of the grammar here, but malak Adonai does kind of, you might say, literally mean the angel of the Lord. Now, this might not seem important, but sometimes people have tried to say that this is merely just an angel of the Lord. But there's actually a way to say it to where you could make a distinction to say an angel of the Lord, and this is not one of those situations. If you were to say an angel of the Lord, or perhaps from the Lord, you'd have to say malak me Adonai, or ma Adonai. And in this case, of course, that's not what it says. So this is the angel of the Lord, or the sort of instantiation or theophany of the Lord. And this is even why it says to Moses, take off your shoes, for this is holy ground, right? The very presence of God is here. All right, so let's continue on. Well, we have be lebat esh mitok ha sene. Be lebat esh mitok ha sene. All right, so what do we have here? Well, this is that preposition be, meaning in, with, by, among, against sometimes here. So here, meaning, of course, in, probably. That would be a good English word. And then levat, which means like a flame, right? And then esh, meaning fire. So with a flame of fire, and then mitok, from, and then tok, meaning like in the middle or in the midst of. So with or in a flame of fire from in the midst of hasadeh. And this is saneh, is just like a word meaning like a bush of some sort. From what I understand, it's not super clear as to exactly what it refers to, but maybe some kind of tree or bush or something like that. In any case, right, the angel of the Lord, the very presence of God, is appearing in this, very strange and miraculous situation. All right, so then it continues here. It says, Vayar vechene chasene boer baesh. Vayar vechene chasene boer baesh. Actually sounds kind of cool, doesn't it? It kind of has a bit of a rhythmic, rhyming sense to it. And so it's probably kind of meant to be that it repeats essentially the same thing, just over again. So it says, Vayar, and he saw, so now it's talking about Moses, and he saw, or looked, Vechine, and behold, Chasane, the bush, Boer, was burning, Baesh, with fire. So, and he looked, and behold, the bush was burning with fire. All right, and then we have Ve Chasne Enenu Ukal. Ve Chasne Enenu Ukal. So, interesting little turn of phrase here, but and the bush, vechasane, and this is the word ain, meaning there was not, or it wasn't. And so this little new added to it is this word it that we've seen with like mi menu, right? From it. And so here, nenu, so there was not it, or there wasn't, or it wasn't, and then ukal. And ukal is from that word akal, meaning to eat. And so ukal just means to be eaten, right? So in other words, the bush was not being eaten or consumed by the fire. Again, a miracle, right? So here's Moses standing before this bush that all of a sudden is just on fire, but it's not being burned up. And of course, this is because the angel of the Lord, the presence of God is there. And so it's not really a fire in the normal sense. It's really just the glory of the Lord, his holiness sort of radiating through this particular place or point. Again, for whatever reason, we don't know exactly why he chose this spot, but it was to interact with and encounter Moses and to change his trajectory in life and to put him on task to release the people of Israel, God's people, and to fulfill his promise to Abraham all those hundreds of years before. All right, well, let's go ahead and read another verse here. And this one's a little bit less fun. It's a bit of a downer here. And that's because it has to do with death. But if you understand it rightly, it's actually a very encouraging message about the very nature of God and what he expects from his people. And that is justice, right? So we have the word here, lo, and lo means no, good. Lo, you metu, avot, al, banim, al banim. All right, so what do we have here? Well, we have lo, not, and then you metu. Now, this is that tricky word or form because, like I said, mut is, or mit is missing a letter in the middle here. And so it oftentimes kind of looks a little different. And so in this case, it really just means something like he will not kill or maybe be put to death. So he will not be put to death. And who is that? Avot. Avot. And so av is the word for father. And then ot is the plural. So avot, fathers. So in other words, fathers will not be put to death or die, all on account of or because of banim, sons, right? So ben is son, and then this im is plural, banim. Now, one thing just briefly here is this ending here, im, we've seen quite a bit for plural, as in the word Elohim and so on. And this is the normal plural ending for a masculine word like ben, son. So son is ben, but banim is plural, sons, banim. But this is actually a little bit of an oddity because av is a masculine word, obviously father, but this ot is a plural ending, but normally for the feminine or feminine words. So it's a little bit of an oddity, a bit of an exception, and sometimes this is what really kind of trips people up as they're getting started, because how could you possibly know this until you know this? And this does make things complicated. But thankfully, av is a relatively common word, and so you just have to remember that avot is the plural of av, even though this is technically a feminine ending. All right. So in other words, fathers shall not die or be put to death on account of sons. All right. U vanim lo yumetu al avot. U vanim lo yumatu al avot. All right, so what do we have here? Well, pretty much the same thing, just opposite. U and vanim, sons, right? Ben, im, banim, sons. Lo Lo means no. Yumetu, right? The same word here from mut or met, to die. So they shall not be put to death, the sons, all on account of or because of avot, the fathers, right? So the fathers shall not be put to death for the sons, and the sons shall not be put to death for the fathers. All right, then we have ish. Ish, hopefully you remember what ish means. Becheto yumatu. Ish becheto yumatu. Ish becheto yumatu. All right, so what do we have here? Well, ish means man. And remember, we've mentioned this before, but sometimes ish means just man, but sometimes it gets used in this kind of idiomatic way to mean something like each man or every man, okay? In this case, probably something like each man, referring to father and son or whoever. So each man, be, a preposition in, with, by, maybe for, or because of, right? So each man in or with his sin, chata, his own sin, we might even say, yumatu, he shall be put to death or killed. So again, this is really trying to make clear that in God's world, in God's system, there is justice in the sense that you're not liable for the sin and the guilt of others, at least not directly. And this is important because in especially the ancient world, and maybe I'll back this up just a little bit and say that oftentimes when we think about the phrase eye for an eye and tooth for a tooth, we often think perhaps that this is meant to be the standard, right? So you get to do something, right? So if somebody knocks out your tooth, you get to knock out their tooth, right? They take out your eye, then you get to gouge out their eye. But that's not necessarily what was behind the sense of that phrase, but even just the broader sense of the law itself. And we know this partly because Jesus comes along and actually gives us that sort of, you've heard it said, but I say, right? Turn the other cheek, right? In other words, you can show mercy, right? Mercy is allowed. You don't have to take an eye out or take a tooth out because someone took yours. What those laws were meant to do was actually to limit, to put a cap on what could be done. In other words, say if you had a son and your son was reckless or did something wrong and killed somebody, right? Well, your son would be liable in a sense of justice to be put to death because of his evil, his wrong. However, what you could not do in God's sort of just system is to not only kill the son, but also kill the father. That wouldn't be allowed because the father is not liable. He's not guilty. He's not the offender. He's not the one who is in sin. And so actually much of the law is really meant to cap what can be done rather than to say what you have to do. God, in God's system, he was always a God of grace and a God of mercy. In the few places where it actually does demand to be put to death, it's because of the concern or the danger of evil and corruption taking over the whole people, right? And that has to do with things like idolatry and magic or necromancy and some other these things where God does actually say to put them to death because he was trying to protect the whole people. However, when it comes to human justice or injustice, really the law was meant to protect and to help and to serve. But always there was the option or the possibility of mercy and grace. And that's because God is full of grace. He is full of mercy. right? He wants to forgive. As we read in Ezekiel 33, it says that God does not delight in the death of even the wicked, right? But he actually desires that even the wicked would turn from his wicked ways and live, as it says. And so really that's the whole goal of God's desire and even him giving us his word, right, to live by. So that's an important principle for us to consider and to remember as we try to live out our life in step with and in devotion to the Lord, and to follow his ways. Again, there is justice, and he is a just and perfect king, but he is also a good and gracious king. And so we too should emulate that grace and that mercy, at least when it makes sense and it is a good and right thing to do. Well, let's go ahead and finish up with our alphabet one last time here. So if you can, join with me and read our alphabet. So we have Aleph, Bet, Gimel, Dalet, He, Vav, Zayin. Chet, Tet, Yod, Kaf, Lamed, Mem, Nun. Samek, Ayin, Pe, Sade, Kof, Resh, Sin, Shin, Tav. All right, well, that is our alphabet and our letter Mem. So I hope that you learned something. And again, I really do hope that you'll share something that you learned today. And I look forward to seeing you next time with our next letter.